What's up, guys? This is Jay Griff. Welcome back to the Dark Souls 2 Blog of Pain. Today's episode is going to be exclusively about the plot of Dark Souls 2. I'm going to analyze it based off what I know, what I think, and what I don't know in the slightest. And there's actually so much shit that I don't know that I'm only going to highlight a very few critical things that you would expect playing through this game you might know, but that I have no idea about at all. Okay, so what I know about Dark Souls 2, without drifting back into the theories I presented earlier, which I still stand by, we know that the undead curse is back in whatever the world that Dark Souls is set in is called. And we know that the powers of the world, the powers that be, whoever was running the kingdoms at the time, seemed to have done everything they could to stamp it out wholesale, and it looks like they completely broke their nations and their populations attempting that, because you run into very few living people, and the entire place is just in utter ruins. Even though everything that you find, every item has a description, usually with a piece of lore attached to it, and talks about the splendor and the grandiose scale of the kingdoms that were in these locations and no longer are. What we know is that another thing we definitely know is that the bonfires are still lit. Now, the bonfires are cremated human remains, and they are linked to the first flame. They are a sign that the Age of Fire has not ended. So even though it's once again in decline or something, we know that the Age of Fire technically isn't over. Otherwise, the bonfires would be completely snuffed out and would be gone. We also know that the Fire Keepers aren't necessarily doing their duties anymore. We know at least 4 of them have gathered, and I haven't encountered another Firekeeper anywhere. So I don't know what's going on with the Firekeepers, but it would appear they're not on it anymore. Another thing that we know at this roughly, I think, probably halfway point in the game is that there is no sign of the Abyss anywhere. Anywhere at all. There are really dark locations in Dark Souls, and there are places that seem tied to the old catacombs, but that doesn't mean the Abyss is there. The Abyss had a very profound effect on humanity, and it doesn't appear that that is going on anywhere in the game, and no one has mentioned the Abyss. So it would seem that the Abyss was, in fact, beaten back by the events of Dark Souls 1. Now, we know that whatever happened to bring Anor Londo down, because we know it's not around anymore, because no one knows its name. No one mentions the gods by name, and when I say no one, I mean no one. A good description I want to bring up is the Divine Blessing. It's an item that you can get that in Dark Souls 1 restored, well, it does the same in both games, but restores all your health and cures any status ailments you have. And the old description read, Holy water from the goddess Guinevere. The goddess of sunlight Guinevere, daughter of the great lord of sunlight Gwyn, is cherished by all and is the symbol of bounty and fertility. Guinevere was a very big deal to people back then, and her image was maintained in Anor Londo long after she actually left to stop people from panicking. That was done by Gwendolyn. The Divine Blessing is still in the game. It's still in Dark Souls 2, but it's a very different description. Now what it says is it is water blessed by an ancient goddess. Her name is long forgotten. And the Magic Academy of Melfia denies even her existence. In any age, there are those who refuse to see reason. It is their meddling that distorts the truth. That's a very interesting item description, and it tells you, and I think it lends some credence to my theory that there was a war between humanity and Anor Londo lost, in that even the Magic Academy of one of the kingdoms that supposedly rose in its wake will not even acknowledge that there was once a goddess involved in the making of these divine blessings, and no one remembers that it was in fact Guinevere, the Queen of Sunlight. Very interesting. That means that there's absolutely no chance that anyone knows of Gwyn, and even in the time of Gwyn and Gwendolyn, Gwyn and Guinevere, Gwendolyn, the third born of Lord Gwyn, was kept a secret. So definitely nobody knows about him. Now, there was a conversation with an NPC, Chloane, I think was her name, and she, after you get her back to like the hub world, she'll talk to you, and she says, "Did you know that Drangleic, which is the nation that you're in, was once called something else? What is it? Well, no one really remembers, do they?" So that tells you right away, Drangleic wasn't always called Drangleic. And, one could assume that, but that pretty much confirms it. And again, I think it lends credibility to the theory that you're standing in what's left of Lordran. Perhaps even standing at old Firelink Shrine, but the topography would really have had to take a beating for that to be true. The biggest, probably, thing that I've found very recently that I think was like, hey, this was definitely Lordran, was that in Lordran, that was where the worship of the sun and where the worship of Gwyn as the Lord of Sunlight happened. It was the big hub. Now, in Dark Souls 1, there was a bonfire that was very hard to get to because you had to get past the Hellkite Drake, who I don't actually think you can defeat. Even if you're completely maxed out, I don't think it's possible to defeat the Hellkite Drake, but you can slip past it. It's difficult, but you can do it. And you find yourself at the Sunlight Altar, which has a broken statue of the firstborn of Gwyn. It's his forgotten firstborn son who lost the annals of history and was doomed to be forgotten himself as punishment. You find Solaire there staring at the statue once, and you can join his covenant. But those statues would only be in Lordran. And as I was going through an area in Dark Souls 2 called Harvest Valley, I found a hidden path and followed it. And in the back of this like cave, there's a big hole in the ceiling, and sunlight was coming down, and there was vegetation growing. But in the back is another one of these broken idols of the Sunlight Altar. And I was flipping out when I found that, because I was like, that is basically confirmation. Why else would that be here if I'm not standing in Lordran? And you're actually able to join the Sunlight Covenant by kneeling and I don't know what your character's doing, but I guess praying at the altar, praying to the sun, and you can join that covenant. And it changes your phantom. Instead of being white when it's summoned, your phantom is golden. It connects you more to people that are members of that covenant. You don't get tokens of fidelity for helping people anymore. You get tokens of sunlight, which can be given to the altar to increase your ranks in the covenant. And it shouldn't be there if this isn't Lordran. And in fact, it looks like they used the exact same assets from Dark Souls 1 and just popped them into Dark Souls 2 and said, it's going to be a 100% match so that nobody is confused as to what this is supposed to be. The other things I can talk about that I know, one of them weakens part of the theory I had earlier, but it didn't matter. It was my theory about the Dragon Riders and how they may have been turned to work for Anor Londo. Well, I got some of the Dragon Riders equipment, and the lore on that seems to run contrary. In fact, they rose into prominence in the war against the giants. So the Dragon Riders were working with the humans, not Anor Londo. But that does support the theory that humans struck some sort of a deal with the everlasting dragon to get a bunch of drakes on their side so that they could have the power to take on Anor Londo, because on their own, humans versus the gods or the ancient lords or the giants, it's not going to work out. They're going to lose. Also noticed that an NPC called Strayed, who sells miracles and hexes and spells, he mentioned the Witch of Izalith and her war against, quote, the Old Ones. And I found that very interesting, because that means people either don't remember or are calling them something differently, because that war was against the everlasting dragons. And it was very clearly known that that was a war against dragons, and now it's just called the war against the Old Ones, as though people don't know that those were dragons. I don't know. That's the only time it's been mentioned, so I've, more to follow on that, I guess. Now, as for what I think, well, like I've already said, I think the game is set in Lordran. There's more than Lordran in the world of Dark Souls, though. We know that there is Astora, we know there is Karim, we know there is, the place in the DLC, Ulasil. We know there's Ulasil, and we know there were several other nations at the time of Dark Souls 1. Since then, I believe all of those have fallen one way or another and been replaced by different kingdoms with different names. There's even 2 kingdoms mentioned in Dark Souls 2 that a piece of gear says were founded by the same guy, and yet somehow devolved into bitterness and jealousy and rivalry and became enemies. What the hell's going on with that, The game looks like it is following the general layout of Lordran. If the area that I mentioned was Anor Londo is Anor Londo, or what's left of it, then the rest of the game's layout, so far at least, actually makes a whole lot of sense. Because off to one side, you had the area with the human castle that actually kind of looks like the old undead parish. Then if you go through Anor Londo, you end up on the other side of it, and you descend into this massive fort that's full of like cells and all kinds of undead, and it kind of reminds me of Sen's Fortress. And if you go to the very far side of it, you can see that it's connected to a set of rooftops going down, and that could be the Undead Burg, or may have at one time been the Undead Burg. So all of that links in very well with the old layout of Dark Souls 1. Where New Londo or the Valley of Drakes would fit into that, I don't know. But I also haven't seen the entire world yet. I haven't seen the whole map. I think the powers of the old lords as they were, even though the chosen undead took their souls, I think they're starting to return, but they don't yet have full form. Now, I say the chosen undead took their souls because when he killed a lord, he would take their soul. When he killed a powerful being, he would claim their soul, and he could actually carry it around with him and consume them if he wanted to, or make weapons out of them. He could do what he wanted with these souls, but he offered the Lord's souls to the Lord Vessel, eventually claimed Lord Gwyn's Lord Soul, and I believe in the canon, sacrificed himself to Link the Fire, which would claim not only his soul, but also what was left of Gwyn's soul that he was carrying, and eventually claim the Lord Vessel as well outside the Firelink altar, which leads one to believe that there's a possibility that those Lord Souls, which came from the First Flame originally, returned to the First Flame. And now they might be coming back out of it. They might not be fully formed. Obviously, Gwyn hasn't popped out of the first flame and started kicking in the door and saying, "What the fuck happened to the world I built? I guess I'll rebuild it." That hasn't happened. But it does look like there's pieces of them starting to crop back up. Gwyn's miracles still work. The divine blessings of Guinevere still have power. There's even a boss fight that I could be completely off the beaten path with this, and admittedly it's a stretch. But there's a boss fight when you go down into one valley area, you start running into skeletons and necromancers, which is what would hang out in the catacombs, which led down to the Tomb of the Giants, which is where the Grave Lord Nito lived, or stayed. He doesn't really live because he is the first of the dead. But that's where Grave Lord Nito lived, or stayed. And the Grave Lord is like a giant dead guy made of dead guys. He has kind of a communal body, I guess you could say. It's made up of hundreds of corpses. And the boss I'm talking about is the Skeleton Lord. And the Skeleton Lord, when you first walk in, is 3 skeleton mages. They use different attacks, but they all share a life bar. Killing them off takes a certain amount off that bar, and when they die, other undead start cropping up out of this area to fight you, and you have to kill all of them too to get the life bar all the way down to 0. And the first thing I thought about that is that's kind of like if Nito had been broken apart and was starting to come back together. So that could be an echo of Nito's Lord Soul trying to start, rebuilding his old body. And step 1 is the Skeleton Lord, which you then walked in and stepped all over. Now notice the Skeleton Lord has a powerful soul that you got. It doesn't say anything about being part of Nito, but I also don't think it would at this stage because it's kind of a very different thing. It just might be from the same source of power. And I thought that was, kind of interesting. There's also a cleric. I don't know if it's accurate to call her cleric, but she talks to you about faith. She sells you miracles. She pushes miracles like she's pushing crack. She doesn't know what the first flame is, though. She brings it up. She brings it up to be like, miracles were born of the first flame, which is where the gods came from. And then she goes on to say, what is the first flame? As though you had asked her. And she goes, well, it's... You're not ready to comprehend the answer. She doesn't fucking know. And I think probably nobody knows what the first flame is anymore, because the only people who would have cared about the first flame were the people who cared about the first lords that came out of it. Once those lords got overthrown, once Anor Londo got destroyed, nobody's going to bother about the first flame. Nobody knows why there are bonfires around here. And without the undead, if the curse of the undead went away, nobody even knows what the bonfires do. Nobody would eventually know that the bonfires were where the undead would resurrect and were for keeping the abyss away. And if the rekindled first flame destroyed the abyss, or at least pushed it so far away that it's not an issue anymore, nobody knows why the bonfires even exist. So, that's that. As for things I don't know at all, I don't know why the undead curse came back, nor do I know where the undead curse is even from. I don't know what the undead curse really even is. It's just an affliction that came upon humanity once before and is back again. Nobody knows why it is, but everybody knows it's something bad. It terrifies them. I don't know what the kingdoms that rose and fell between Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2 were. There is some scattered lore about them, but I'm completely unable to piece it together into any kind of coherent picture. I simply don't have the knowledge to plug that one in. I just know that I keep seeing different kingdom names get thrown around in different contexts. And I also don't know what my character is trying to do, which is very Dark Souls. in Dark Souls 1 until you meet Kingseeker Frampt or Darkstalker Koth, or in my case, neither of them, until you met Guinevere, you didn't know what you were trying to do. No one told you because nobody knew. And that's kind of the same way here. All I know is that I'm undead. I was driven to come back to wherever I am, be it Lordran or whatever, and the Firekeepers said you should just go and meet up with this girl, and that's the Emerald Herald, and all she tells us is bearer of the curse, seek souls, seek larger souls, seek the souls of the four beings, they will allow you to see the king. Why I want to see this king? I don't know. Who the king is? I don't know. None of this information is being given to the player. And with a silent protagonist, we can't just seek that answer. We just have to kind of piece it together as time goes on. But this video has started to get really, really long, so that is my current theory, basically, where I'm standing with the plot of this game. It's very, very interesting, and it's really got me hooked. And if you guys have figured it out by now, you should probably pick this game up, or the first one, or maybe even Demon Souls. I haven't even played that one. But hey guys, this is Jay Griff. Thanks for listening.